The fluorescent hum of the supermarket aisle used to be the sound of abundance, the background noise of the American dream where caloric intake was the one variable of human existence that had been seemingly solved. Today, that hum feels more like the low-frequency drone of a crime scene. Stand in front of the meat counter in a Kroger in Ohio or a Safeway in California, and you will witness a psychological phenomenon that economists in Washington refuse to quantify. You see it in the hesitation of a mother holding a package of ground beef, calculating the trade-off between protein and a full tank of gas. You see it in the shrinkflation of cereal boxes that have become two-dimensional facades, hiding the hollowness within. The official government data, released with bureaucratic fanfare by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, insists that the dragon has been slain. They tell you that inflation has cooled to a manageable 3%, that the transitory storm has passed. Yet, when you scan the receipt, the numbers stare back with a brutality that defies the official narrative. A basket of groceries that cost $100 in 2019 now demands nearly $140. This is not a rounding error. This is not a supply chain hiccup. This is a structural looting of the working class, executed through the most inelastic commodity on earth, food. We are told this is the result of post-pandemic adjustments or Putin's price hike. These are convenient fictions designed to obscure a much darker reality. We are living under the thumb of a hidden cartel, a tightening oligopoly that has financialized the very calories you need to survive. To understand why your grocery bill has become a second mortgage, we must first dismantle the gaslighting operation known as the Consumer Price Index (CPI). The government's measurement of inflation is a masterclass in statistical sleight of hand, designed not to reflect your reality, but to suppress the cost of living adjustments (COLA) for federal entitlements. The CPI uses a technique called hedonic adjustment. If the price of a steak rises by 50%, but the government decides the steak is of higher quality, or simply swaps it out of the theoretical basket for hamburger meat, because that is what consumers are now forced to buy, the index registers a lower rate of inflation. They call this substitution. In the real world, it is called a declining standard of living. When the USDA Economic Research Service reported in late 2023 that U.S. households were spending the highest percentage of their disposable income on food since 1991, they were admitting that 3 decades of progress had been erased in 3 years. But the price tag is merely the symptom. The disease is the architecture of the food system itself. We do not have a free market in agriculture. We have a choke point economy, where a handful of colossal entities stand between the farmer and the field and the fork on your table, extracting a toll at every step of the journey. This is not capitalism. It is neo-feudalism, with better marketing. The roots of this consolidation were planted deep in the soil of the 1970s, specifically during the tenure of Richard Nixon's Secretary of Agriculture, Earl Butz. Butz was a man with a singular, ruthless philosophy: get big or get out. He dismantled the New Deal-era supply management systems that kept farm prices stable and encouraged a frantic race to the bottom, urging farmers to plant fensoro to fensoro. The goal was cheap calories to fuel the industrial workforce and pacify the urban electorate. For 40 years, it appeared to work. Food prices dropped relative to wages, and the supermarket became a temple of infinite variety. But hidden behind the walls of cheap corn syrup and factory-farmed poultry, a massive concentration of power was coalescing. While we were distracted by the illusion of choice, thinking that 50 brands of pasta sauce meant 50 different companies, the reality was that the entire supply chain was being bought up by fewer and fewer players. Today, the illusion has shattered. We are left with the illusion of choice, masking the reality of the ABCD giants: Archer Daniels Midland, Bunge Cargill, and Louis Dreyfus. These 4 companies control an estimated 70 to 90% of the global grain trade. They are the invisible emperors of agriculture. They do not just move grain. They set the price of the basic building blocks of the human diet. When you hear about supply chain disruptions, what you are often hearing is these behemoths flexing their pricing power to expand margins in a crisis. This leads us to the phenomenon popularized as greedflation, a term the financial media treats with derision but which corporate earnings calls confirm with brazen arrogance. During the height of the 2021 to 2023 inflationary spike, we were told that rising prices were strictly a result of rising input costs: fuel, fertilizer, labor. If that were true, corporate profit margins would have remained flat or compressed. Instead, they exploded. A report by the Roosevelt Institute in 2024 analyzed the markups of major food corporations and found a startling divergence. As their input costs began to fall in late 2023, the prices on the shelf did not follow. They stayed high. This is what economists call rocket and feather pricing. Prices shoot up like a rocket when costs rise, but float down like a feather if they fall at all when costs drop. The reason they can do this is simple: lack of competition. In the U.S. meat industry, 4 corporations, Tyson, JB's, Cargill, and National Beef Control, 85% of the beef market. In 1977, that number was 25%. When you have 4 men in a room deciding the price of a hamburger for 300 million people, you do not need a conspiracy. You just need a tacit understanding that nobody benefits from a price war. They have locked the market into a permanent state of upward drift. We must also scrutinize the role of the retail giants. the gatekeepers who control the final mile of the food system. The merger arbitrage between Kroger and Albertsons, currently under antitrust scrutiny, is just the latest chapter in a saga of dominance. These entities have moved beyond simple retail. They have become data extraction machines. They know your price sensitivity better than you know yourself. Through loyalty cards and digital coupons, they track exactly how much pain you can tolerate before you switch brands or walk away. This brings us to a terrifying new variable: algorithmic collusion. Just as the rental market was rigged by RealPage software, forcing rents up across entire cities, the grocery sector is increasingly reliant on AI-driven pricing tools. These algorithms do not compete to offer the lowest price. They coordinate to find the highest price the market will bear without breaking. It is a digital cartel, operating at the speed of light, invisible to the regulators looking for old-fashioned smoke-filled rooms. The price of a carton of eggs is no longer determined by the cost of chicken feed. It is determined by an algorithm calculating your desperation. However, blaming the corporations alone is a half-truth that misses the engine. One of this crisis, the monetary debasement. The corporations are the sharks, but the Federal Reserve filled the pool with blood. When the U.S. government printed 40% of all U.S. dollars in existence between 2020 and 2021, that money had to go somewhere. This is the Cartel effect in action. The fresh capital flowed first to Wall Street, pumping up asset prices, and then sloshed into the commodity markets. The ABCD giants and the hedge funds speculated on grain futures, driving up the price of wheat, corn, and soy before a single seed was planted. This financialization of food means that your dinner is now an asset class for global capital. A pension fund in London or a sovereign wealth fund in Qatar can bet on the price of soybeans. And the ripple effect is felt by a single mother in Detroit. The inflation we see is the currency losing its value, and food, being a hard asset that requires energy and land to produce, is merely repricing itself in worthless paper. The 1970s taught us that food prices are the leading indicator of a dying currency. When trust in the sovereign debt wavers, people rush to buy the things that keep them alive. The historical parallels to this moment are chilling. We are echoing the Great Grain Robbery of 1972, when the Soviet Union quietly bought up a quarter of the U.S. wheat harvest, sending domestic food prices skyrocketing and destabilizing the Nixon administration. Today, the buyers are different. China has been hoarding grain reserves at a pace that suggests they are preparing for a long winter of geopolitical isolation, but the result is the same. The global buffer stocks of food are shrinking. According to the United Nations FAO reports, the stocks-to-use ratio for major cereals is tightening. We are operating a just-in-time global food system that has zero redundancy. A drought in the Mississippi River Basin, a blockade in the Black Sea, or a new regulatory war on nitrogen fertilizer in Europe sends shockwaves through the entire matrix immediately. We have traded resilience for efficiency, and now that the world is becoming inefficient and volatile, we are paying the insurance premium on decades of complacency. The 40% hike in your grocery bill is not a temporary anomaly. It is the market pricing in the end of the era of cheap abundance. Furthermore, we must address the war on supply that is being waged under the guise of environmental policy. This is where the narrative shifts from simple corporate greed to something more systemic and dangerous. Across the Western world, from the Netherlands to Canada to New Zealand, governments are implementing policies to cap nitrogen emissions and reduce herd sizes. While the stated goal is climate preservation, the economic result is a supply shock. You cannot reduce the primary input of modern agriculture, synthetic fertilizer, without reducing the output. The protests of Dutch farmers driving tractors into The Hague were not just local labor disputes. They were the early warning sirens of a global battle over food sovereignty. When you artificially constrain the supply of food in a world with a growing population and a debased currency, the price does not just rise linearly, it goes vertical. The greedflation narrative serves a useful political purpose here. It directs public anger toward the supermarket chains who are indeed profiteering and away from the policymakers who are structurally dismantling the energy-intensive agriculture that sustains 8 billion people. It is a perfect misdirection. As we descend deeper into this rabbit hole, we encounter the shadow costs that are invisible on the shelf sticker, but are paid by society. The ultra-processed food diet, pushed by the oligopoly because it has high margins and infinite shelf life, has created a metabolic health crisis that is bankrupting the healthcare system. This is the hidden tax. You pay 40% more at the register for food that makes you sick, and then you pay higher insurance premiums and taxes to treat the resulting diabetes and heart disease. The food industry and the pharmaceutical industry are symbiotic parasites feeding on the same host. This is why the price of food is a deceptive metric. The true cost includes the destruction of public health and the erosion of local economies. The consolidation has wiped out the middle-class farmer, turning the American heartland into a feudal estate managed by contract growers who owe nothing but debt. While the profits are siphoned off to corporate headquarters in Chicago and New York, the system is efficient at extracting value, but it is catastrophic at preserving values. In the next act, we will witness the convergence of these forces, the collision of the debt crisis, the energy crisis, and the cartelization of the food supply. We are moving toward a moment where availability, not just price, becomes the primary concern. The shelves are full today, but the logistics network that fills them is fraying. The trucking industry is in a recession, the rail networks are underinvested, and the labor force is aging. The greedflation cartel is merely the first layer of the siege. What lies beneath is a fundamental restructuring of how humanity sustains itself, a return to a world where food is power and hunger is a weapon. The 40% increase was just the opening bid. The true anatomy of this crisis is revealed only when we drill down to the bedrock of modern civilization, the thermodynamic link between energy and food. This is the point of convergence where the monetary inflation of the central banks collides violently with the physical constraints of the real world. We must strip away the pastoral imagery of the red barn and the rolling hills to confront a brutal industrial fact. In the modern era, we do not eat food. We eat transformed fossil fuels. Every calorie on your plate requires approximately 10 calories of hydrocarbon energy to produce, process, transport, and refrigerate. The corn that feeds the cattle is grown with nitrogen fertilizer derived from natural gas. The tractor that harvests the corn runs on diesel. The truck that carries the beef to the slaughterhouse runs on diesel. The plastic wrap that seals the meat is a petroleum byproduct. Therefore, the greedflation cartel is not merely leveraging market dominance, they are leveraging the volatility of the global energy markets to enforce a permanent price hike. When the price of oil spikes, the price of food must mathematically follow. But here's the catch, the mechanism of the ratchet. When oil prices retreat, food prices do not. The cartel absorbs the difference as margin expansion. They have conditioned the consumer to accept $5 eggs as a result of supply chain issues. So when the supply chain heals, the $5 price tag remains, and the difference flows directly into stock buybacks. This is the arbitrage of expectations. We are witnessing the weaponization of the Haber-Bosch process, the chemical miracle invented in the early 20th century that allows us to synthesize ammonia from nitrogen and hydrogen. It is estimated that this single industrial process supports nearly 4 billion human lives. Half the planet's population exists solely because we figured out how to turn natural gas into bread. Now, look at the geopolitical map. The primary exporters of the raw materials for this process, natural gas, potash, phosphates, are Russia, Belarus, and China. By engaging in a bifurcated trade war and sanctioning the very arteries of global agriculture, the West has inadvertently placed its food security in the hands of its geopolitical rivals. The greedflation giants know this. Companies like Nutrien and Mosaic, which control the fertilizer supply in North America, understand that they are selling a product with zero elasticity. You cannot choose not to fertilize the soil if you want to harvest. This allows for monopolistic pricing power that makes the tech monopolies look benevolent by comparison. In 2022, fertilizer prices tripled. Farmers didn't absorb that cost. They passed it to the food processors, who passed it to the retailers, who passed it to you, adding a markup percentage at every single step. The inflation compounds. It is a cascading waterfall of price increases that begins in a natural gas field in Siberia and ends at your kitchen table. The convergence intensifies when we overlay the greenflation mandates, the regulatory push to decarbonize agriculture. This is the second engine of the crisis. Across the European Union, and increasingly in North America, technocrats are imposing strict limits on nitrogen usage and methane emissions. While the environmental intent is debated in academia, the economic result is binary: lower yields and higher prices. We saw the preview of this movie in Sri Lanka in 2022. The government banned synthetic fertilizers overnight in a disastrous bid to become the world's first 100% organic nation. The result was not an ecological utopia. It was a 90% collapse in rice production, hyperinflation, starvation, and a violent revolution that stormed the presidential palace. While the West is unlikely to see such a rapid collapse, the trajectory is the same. By making traditional farming more expensive and legally hazardous through Scope 3 emission reporting requirements, we are driving the small and medium-sized independent farmers into bankruptcy. Who buys their land? The megacorporations and the sovereign wealth funds. Bill Gates is now the largest private owner of farmland in the United States. He is not buying it to drive a tractor. He is buying it because he understands that in a world of debased currency and supply constraints, the soil itself is the only asset that matters. The consolidation of land ownership is the final nail in the coffin of cheap food. When the land is owned by a few balance sheets, the rent-seeker extraction becomes total. This leads us to the chicken tournament system, a dark case study in how this neo-feudalism operates on the ground. In the U.S. poultry industry, farmers technically own the land and the barns, but they do not own the chickens. The chickens are owned by the integrator Tyson, Pilgrims, Pride, Purdue. The integrator provides the birds, the feed, and the medicine. The farmer provides the labor and takes on all the debt to build the facilities. The farmers are then ranked against each other in a tournament. If your chickens don't fatten up as much as your neighbors, you get paid less. It is a zero-sum game designed to squeeze maximum efficiency out of the system, while transferring all the risk to the serf on the tractor. If a disease outbreak hits, the farmer loses everything. The corporation simply writes off the inventory. This model is now being exported to other sectors of agriculture. It destroys the resilience of the rural economy and ensures that the family farm is nothing more than a nostalgic label on a package of industrial meat. The consumer believes they are supporting a rustic ideal, but their dollars are flowing into a system that treats both the animal and the farmer as disposable widgets in a quarterly earnings report. The just-in-time fragility of this system cannot be overstated. We have optimized our food distribution for efficiency, not redundancy. The average city holds only 3 days' worth of food. If the trucks stop, the shelves are bare in 72 hours. We saw a glimpse of this during the pandemic, but the structural risks have grown since then. The U.S. rail network, which moves the vast majority of grain and fertilizer, has slashed its workforce and deferred maintenance to boost operating ratios for Wall Street. The Mississippi River, the aorta of American agriculture, has faced record low water levels due to drought, forcing barges to run light or stop completely. These are not black swans, they are gray rhinos, obvious looming threats that we are ignoring. The Greedflation cartel has no incentive to build resilience. Resilience is expensive. Redundancy hurts margins. They are betting that when the system breaks, the government will step in with a bailout to keep the population fed. They are effectively holding the nation's stomach hostage. They have privatized the profits of efficiency and socialized the risks of starvation. We have arrived at the philosophical precipice. The question, why are groceries up 40%, is not an economic query. It is a civilizational alarm bell. It signifies the end of the cheap food era that underpinned the stability of the post-World War II order. For 70 years, Americans spent less of their income on food than any society in history. This surplus capital allowed for the explosion of the consumer economy. If you didn't have to spend half your pay on bread, you could buy cars, houses, and electronics. That era is reversing. As food reclaims a larger share of the household budget, climbing back toward the 20 or 30% seen in the 19th century, the discretionary economy will collapse. You cannot subscribe to Netflix if you cannot afford milk. This implies a massive contraction in the standard of living, a great leveling where the middle class is forced to make choices that were previously the domain of the impoverished. The illusion of infinite abundance is shattering, revealing the hard limits of a finite planet managed by a predatory financial elite. The stakes could not be higher. Food is the ultimate currency. You can print dollars, you can digitize yen, you can hypothecate bonds, but you cannot print calories. In the coming decade, the divide between those who have access to the source of their food and those who are dependent on the company store will become the primary definition of class. The company store of the 2030s is not a mining camp shack. It is a digital app, a subscription service, a QR code that rations your carbon allowance for meat consumption. The centralization of the food supply creates a choke point for control. If you control the food, you do not need a police force. You have absolute leverage over the population. The greedflation we see today is merely the accumulation of that leverage. The corporations are building the walls of the garden, and once the gates are closed, the price of admission will be whatever they dictate. The timeline for this transition is already in motion. We are entering the scarcity decade. The 2020s were the wake-up call. The 2030s will be the adjustment. We will likely see the return of price controls, a favorite tool of desperate governments, that always leads to shortages and black markets. We will see food nationalism, where nations ban exports to feed their own populations, breaking the global trade pacts. We saw India ban rice exports, and Indonesia ban palm oil exports recently. This trend will accelerate. The global supermarket is fragmenting into regional fortresses. The just-in-time delivery of avocados from Mexico to a hipster cafe in Brooklyn is an anomaly of history, not a permanent right. The convergence of deglobalization, currency debasement, and corporate oligopoly guarantees that the high prices are sticky. They are the new baseline, the floor from which the next crisis will launch. So, what is the countermove? How does one navigate a rigged game? The answer lies in opting out of the system to the greatest extent possible. This is not a call for everyone to become a homesteader. That is romantic and impractical for most. But it is a call for food sovereignty. It means shortening your supply chain. It means bypassing the big four retailers and building direct relationships with local producers who are also being squeezed by the cartel. A side of beef bought directly from a rancher is not only cheaper per pound than the grocery store. It is a vote against the system. It is an act of financial rebellion. It means treating your pantry not as a storage space, but as a bank vault. A deep freezer full of meat is an asset that yields a tax-free return equal to the rate of inflation. If beef goes up 20% next year, your investment has appreciated 20%. Tax-free in a world of negative real interest rates. A 50-pound bag of rice is a better store of value than a government bond. True wealth in the coming era will be measured in autonomy. The ability to produce, store, or directly source your own calories is a form of liberty that no central bank can inflate away, and no algorithm can price gouge. We must reject the convenience culture that lured us into this trap. Convenience was the bait. Dependence is the hook. The 40% hike in your grocery bill is the fee you pay for outsourcing your survival to a boardroom that views you as a statistic. The hum of the supermarket aisle has changed tone. It is no longer the sound of abundance. It is the sound of a countdown. The system is telling you, in the language of price tags and shrinking packages, that the party is over. The Greedflation cartel has made their move. They have bet that you will remain passive, that you will complain but ultimately swipe the card. It is time to take the other side of that trade. It is time to recognize that in a world of fake money and artificial scarcity, the most revolutionary act you can commit is to secure the reality of your own existence. The receipt in your hand is not just a bill. It is a declaration of war on your standard of living. Act accordingly.